What is up, YouTube? Today I'm here to talk to you guys about a very exciting topic. Well, depends who you ask, but according to me, very exciting topic. Game theory optimal playing in poker, aka GTO. This has been a very hot topic for many years now, and in this video I will cover the example to explore some of the basic concepts of GTO. But first, we need to get a couple of definitions out of the way. Let's consider the combination of every decision a player could make in a hand, every bet, call, raise or fold. Let's call that his strategy. And for a heads-up spot, we can say that a set of two strategies, heroes and villains, is at a Nash equilibrium when given the other player's strategy, keeping the other player's strategy fixed. Neither player has incentive to alter his or her own strategy. In this equilibrium, the strategies both players play are game theory optimal, or GTO. So at equilibrium, villain plays GTO, and even though we know his strategy, we know with which range he bets, calls and raises, there's no way for us to exploit that because he plays his GTO strategy. This definition implies that GTO is kind of a defensive strategy. We try to defend our fair share of the pot. We try to maximize the minimum amount of the pot we capture. We always make sure that we capture our fair share of the pot. Fair share as defined by this equilibrium solution. What GTO is not is max EV. It doesn't explicitly take advantage of any mistakes villain might make. Now, when you play GTO, if villain makes mistakes, he will hand you some EV just like that. But if you are aware of villain's leaks, you could take advantage of those and capture more chips out of the pot than a GTO strategy would. So we got that out of the way. Now let's move on to the example I was gonna talk about. So the classic example is a river spot where one player, let's call him Hero, has a polarized range of nuts and air. Nuts being hands which have 100% equity and air hands having 0% equity. And villain has a range consisting solely out of bluff catchers. These are hands that beat Hero's air combos but lose to all of his nut combos. We can make this example more tangible by using real cards in a hypothetical example. I'm still calling it a hypothetical example as there is no real way for us to end up in this particular river spot with these hands. So consider a board where the flop was 3-3-3, turn is a 5, the river is a 6, no flushes possible. There's $100 in the middle, pot of $100, and each player has $100 behind. So there's a pot-sized bet behind. Hero is in position with a range of nuts and air. Hero has 4 combinations of pocket aces in his range and 4 combinations of 7 deuce suited. On the other hand, we have villain, which has a range consisting solely out of bluff catchers. So we can give him, for example, a range of 4 combinations of pocket tens. You see that in this example, there is no overlap between both ranges. The bluff catchers of villain don't block any of the value hands or any of the bluffs of Hero. So this makes it a clean example that that is exactly like the theoretical example I started talking about. So there are 2 decisions in this example that matter. First of all, Hero will jam all his pocket aces, that's no decision. But the decision he has is how often does he bluff with his 7 deuce suited. The second decision in this example is villain's decision. He will call or fold with his bluff catcher his pocket tens. So the question is, how often will he call? How often will he fold? So equilibrium in this spot is reached when both players make each other indifferent in those decision points. So for starters, Hero bets in such a way that villain is indifferent between calling and folding. This means that Hero bluffs in such a way that for villain the EV of a call is equal to the EV of a fold, which is 0. And when this is true, villain can't make any decisions by making more or less calls to increase his EV. The second point is that villain will call in such a way to make hero indifferent between bluffing or not with the 7 deuce suited. So this means villain calls in such a way that the EV of a bluff for hero becomes equal to the EV of a check back for hero with the 7 deuce suited, which is also 0. Both players are trying to make each other indifferent. So first up, hero goes all in for $100. This bluff needs to work 1 in 2 times to break even. So if villain wants to call in such a way that hero becomes indifferent between bluffing or not, he will call 50% of the time. So that's what he does. At equilibrium here with our pot-sized bet, villain calls 50% of the time with his pocket tens. Then next up, again, hero goes all in for $100. Villain needs to call 100 to win 200. 200 being 100 in the pot, 100 being the bet from hero. So he gets 2-to-1 odds on his call. This means this needs to work 1 in 3 times to break even. So hero will want to bluff in such a way that villain's bluff catches work 1 in 3 times. Hero will value bet 2/3 of the time and bluff 1/3 of the time. This makes villain's bluff catches break even. So that's what it looks like when both players try to make each other indifferent. Now, how does that look like in our example? We had hero with 4 combinations of pocket aces and 4 combinations of 7 deuce suited. So he will bet his 4 combinations of aces and bluff with 2 combinations of 7 deuce suited, which will lead to the 2/3 value bet, 1/3 bluffing frequencies that we were looking for. Then on villain's side, well, he will just bluff catch 50% of the time with his pocket 10, so he can bluff catch with 2 combinations and folds 2 other combinations. We can also calculate the equilibrium EVs for this situation. Calculate at equilibrium how much chips every player wins out of the $100 pot. So let's start with looking at hero's EV. When hero bets with pocket aces, half the time he wins $200. He wins $100 from the pot plus $100 from villain's call, because villain calls half the time with his pocket tens. So half the time betting pocket aces, hero will win $200, and the other half of the time he will $100. He will just pick up the pot uncontested. Then when he bets his 7 deuce suited, half the time he will lose his $100, half the time he will win the $100 out of the pot. So on average, that's an EV of 0. If you do the calculation, we see that hero's EV on average, for his 8 combinations of hands, on average for every action is $75. When you look at this calculation, you see that when hero gets to bet a perfectly polarized range versus a range of bluff catchers, he wins the full pot on average every time he gets to make that bet. But in this example, in order to stay balanced, hero can't just bet all the time. He needs to give up with 2 of his bluffs in order to stay balanced with his betting range. So he wins the full pot on average when he gets to bet, and he doesn't win anything out of the pot when he checks back. So the average EV here is $75 for hero. So hero gets to bet 6 out of 8 times and win the full pot on average, and he needs to check back 2 times out of 8. Now from villain's perspective, 6 out of 8 times he faces that perfectly polarized bet against which he's indifferent between calling or folding, so his EV is 0 there. Hero wins the full pot on average, villain doesn't win anything out of the pot, but 2 times out of 8 hero checks and gives up with his bluffs, and villain wins the full pot in those occasions. That leads to an average EV of $25. So when you look at the breakdown of EVs here, the money we make with every hand, we see that our bluffs don't really make money. Our bluffs become indifferent between bluffing and not bluffing. So the money comes from our value bets, and the bluffs basically force villain to make some bluff catches he wouldn't make when we wouldn't have those bluffs. Now when you do some of these EV calculations, you will see that if you keep one player's GTO strategy fixed and toy around with the frequencies of the other player, that the EVs captured by the GTO player will stay the same. So when villain folds too much, hero's bluffs will make more money and make up for the loss of EV from his value bets. And the other way around, if villain bluff catches too often, then hero's bluffs will make less money. Well, they will lose money, but the value bets will make more money. And that will add up to the same EV, that equilibrium EV. But to show you guys that you can do better than GTO, let's consider the scenario where villain, instead of bluff catching with half of his pocket tens, he bluff catches with 3 out of 4 combinations of those pocket tens. Now we have seen that at equilibrium our bluffs break even. So when villain calls more often, our bluffs won't break even anymore. They will lose money. So the exploit we can make, the adjustment we can make to exploit this deviation villain makes from his GTO strategy is that we just should stop bluffing. We only value bet, we stop bluffing, and this allows us to take advantage of the mistake villain makes, and we will capture more EV as our value bets with pocket aces now win more money on average, which leads to an increase of average EV from $75 to $86.5. Now, of course, when villain makes a mistake and we deviate from our own GTO strategy, villain can also readjust if he is aware of this. So if villain calls too much, we will never bluff. If villain sees we never bluff, then he will never call. If he never calls, then we always bluff, blah, blah, blah. You get into some endless leveling game, cycle, guessing game. So yes, players will make mistakes and you will be able to capture more EV out of the pot than GTO would dictate if you take advantage of those mistakes. But those exploits open yourself up for counter-exploitation. Now, I do think part of being a good player is knowing what GTO more or less looks like in some scenarios. That's your baseline. And definitely don't be afraid to take advantage of your opponents when you see them make obvious mistakes that you can exploit. So that's it for this video. If you guys have any questions, if something wasn't really clear, please leave a comment. If you guys liked the content, smash that like button. If you guys didn't like it, maybe gently hit the dislike button. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to be informed whenever a new video is released. I'm probably gonna follow this GTO video up with some other related videos. I'm also gonna try to think of some new content you guys might enjoy watching, and also some content I enjoy making. I want to keep it interesting for both of us. Feel free to hit me up with any suggestions you might have, and we'll see where this journey takes us.